meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Well, hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Now, picture this. You're somewhere in the United States at your home and find yourself surrounded by dirty carpets, soiled sofas, and dingy drapes. What do? Well, one opinion is to call a company called Stanley Steamer. Cleaning stuff is what they do. They use steam to clean household fabrics that you can't just throw into the wash. This company was founded in 1947 and was the first company in the United States by that name. Some of you just now might be thinking, wait a minute, wasn't there a vintage car maker called Stanley Steamer? Well, actually, technically, no, there wasn't. But in the vintage era, there certainly was a car that inspired the name, and in fact, at that time was unofficially referred to in the same term. And that was the Stanley Motor Carriage Company. Identical twins, Francis and Freeland Stanley, were born in 1849 in Kingfield, Maine. Their parents, Solomon and Aphia, were of modest means, but the whole family was both industrious and educated. I mean, at 9 years old, these two, instead of a lemonade stand or mowing lawns to make money, harvested, refined, and sold maple syrup. The next year, they got into making violins. Yeah, these guys couldn't sit still. Once they both finished college around 1874, they at first went separate ways. Francis got into photography and opened a studio in Massachusetts. Freeland chose to become an educator and go into teaching. But after a short while, Freeland discovered that, although a teaching career had its prestige, at the time it did not offer a particularly good income, so he joined his brother in the studio. The two of them put their energy into developing their business. In particular, they began to invent improvements to the whole process of making pictures, both in black and white and even in color. Other photography studios from all over the place sent their plates to the processed by the Stanleys. Their little studio grew to a big business, grossing over $1 million in 1894. And this is where some dude named George Eastman walked into the picture. Early in 1896, this guy Eastman, who had started some young little upstart company he called Kodak, offered the twins $500,000 for their company. The Stanley brothers were all over it, so they were now wealthy, set up for life, and could do and tinker to their heart's content. And both of them decided to get into cars. Now keep in mind, by this time, both of them were quite wealthy and had a keen eye for business. Freeland tinkered with bicycles for a time, and the legend goes that his wife fell off of one and swore never to ride again, hence him getting into cars at her insistence. True or not, the automotive world was in its infancy, and Frank and Free wanted a piece of the action. They had just made a fortune in the photographic industry, so why not make another fortune in this one? Yes, Freeland's common nickname was Free. That's what his friends called him. I'm just going to say this. There's another vintage make I haven't talked about yet called Willie's. Good thing for him, he was Free Stanley and not Free Willie's. Okay, I just had to say it. All right. True to their genetics, the twins designed and built a twin-cylinder steam engine and, using no small amount of bicycle parts and frame design, built their first car around it in 1897. It used a Serpollet-type boiler, was direct drive, compact, nimble, and surprisingly torquey and fast. And they started driving this thing all over New England, and people took notice. They drove their car to mountain peaks, across rivers, through towns, and along beaches, to the wonder and acclaim of the people and even the press. And this was in 1897. In Europe, cars were certainly rare, but far more common than in the U.S., and wherever they went, it was a spectacle. People literally demanded that they open a factory and begin production of their car for general sale. And so, they went out of their semi-retirement and set up a factory. They continued to parade their car as they began to churn out copies by the tens and then by the hundreds. By 1899, they had built some 200 of their cars. But then someone came along and offered to buy their company. Again. This time it was a consortium of businessmen that offered 250 grand for their company, and the Stanleys agreed, as long as they could keep the rights to their name. And so their now sold company became Locomobile. And the Stanleys? Well, over the course of building those 200 cars, they figured out that it was time to retool anyway, because they now knew how to do it way better. And so they broke new ground, redesigned, reorganized, and by 1902 founded the Stanley Motor Carriage Company, the products of which during the vintage era would colloquially be called Stanley Steamers. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History. See you next week. Peace.